History is full of battles that shaped the world, but some were so unbelievable that they defied all logic. Imagine a tiny army holding off an unstoppable force. A last-minute strategy turning certain defeat into victory. Or a single battle deciding the fate of an entire war. These weren't just fights, they were turning points in history. Some of the greatest empires, leaders and civilizations were shaped by these moments, and the outcomes still impact us today. So, let's get into the most shocking, impossible, and history-changing battles ever fought. The Battle of Thermopylae, the ultimate last stand. Some battles are fought for land, others for power, but some are fought purely for survival. One of the most legendary last stands in history happened in 480 BCE, when a small Greek force led by King Leonidas of Sparta faced off against a massive Persian army of King Xerxes. It was 300 Spartans against hundreds of thousands of Persians, and yet their sacrifice became the stuff of legend. So, how did a tiny army manage to hold back an empire? Strategy, terrain, and pure Spartan discipline. When King Xerxes invaded Greece, the city-states needed time to organize their defenses. Leonidas and his elite Spartan warriors, along with a few thousand Greek allies, marched to Thermopylae, a narrow mountain pass that was the perfect defensive position. There, numbers didn't matter. Only skill, discipline, and the ability to fight in tight formations. For 2 full days, the Spartans and their allies held off wave after wave of Persian attacks. Xerxes sent in his best warriors, including the feared immortals, but nothing worked. The Greek phalanx was simply unbreakable. The narrow pass forced the Persians to fight in small numbers, neutralizing their numerical advantage. Every Persian charge was met with a wall of shields, spears, and relentless discipline. But then came the betrayal. A local Greek, Ephialtes, showed Xerxes a secret mountain path that allowed the Persian army to flank the Greeks from behind. Leonidas realized the battle was lost, but instead of retreating, he and his 300 Spartans, along with a few hundred Thespians and Thebans, chose to fight to the death. The final stand was brutal. Surrounded and outnumbered, the Spartans fought with everything they had, until the very last man fell. In the end, the Persians won the battle, but the cost was immense. The courage and sacrifice of the Spartans inspired all of Greece. Just a year later, the Greek forces rallied and defeated the Persians at the Battle of Salamis and the Battle of Palatae. Thermopylae wasn't just a battle. It was a symbol of resistance, courage, and fighting against impossible odds. Nearly 2,500 years later, it remains one of the most legendary last stands in military history. The Battle of Stalingrad, the turning point of World War II. Some battles change wars. Stalingrad didn't just change World War II. It changed the course of history. By the summer of 1942, Hitler's forces had swept across Europe, crushing everything in their path. Now, they had their sights set on the Soviet Union. Their goal? To capture Stalingrad, a vital industrial city on the Volga River. But what just seemed like another conquest quickly turned into one of the deadliest, most brutal battles ever fought. The German 6th Army, one of Hitler's most elite forces, moved in with over 300,000 troops. They expected a swift victory, but the Soviets refused to give up the city. What followed was months of intense street-to-street combat. Buildings were reduced to rubble. Soldiers fought for control of every street. Snipers turned the ruins into a killing field. The Germans expected the Soviets to retreat, but Stalin had ordered his troops to hold the city at all costs. Soviet soldiers were given a simple command: not one step back. The battle dragged on through the brutal Russian winter, with temperatures dropping below -30 degrees centigrade or -22 Fahrenheit. The German army, unprepared for the freezing cold, began to weaken. Then came the Soviet counterattack. In November 1942, the Red Army launched Operation Uranus, a massive encirclement maneuver. Soviet forces struck from the south and north, cutting off the German 6th Army inside Stalingrad. Suddenly, the hunters had become the hunted. Trapped with no supplies, no reinforcements, and no escape, the Germans were slowly starved out. Soldiers froze, starved, and died by their thousands. Hitler refused to let them surrender, insisting they fight to the last man. But by February 1943, after months of suffering, the remaining German forces surrendered. It was a disastrous defeat for Nazi Germany. Over 800,000 Axis troops were killed, wounded, or captured. The myth of German invincibility was shattered, and from that moment on, the Nazis were on the defensive. Stalingrad wasn't just a battle. It was a turning point in World War II. It marked the beginning of Hitler's downfall and proved that the Soviet Union would not be broken. To this day, Stalingrad remains one of the deadliest battles in human history, a testament to bravery, resilience, and the cost of war. The Battle of Midway, the day the Pacific War changed. Some battles are won with brute force. Others are won with intelligence, strategy, and a bit of luck. The Battle of Midway, fought in June 1942, was a perfect example of how one battle can shift the balance of power overnight. 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the Japanese Navy was still unstoppable. Their fleet had conquered islands across the Pacific, and their next target was Midway Atoll, a small but strategically crucial American outpost. If Japan captured it, Hawaii would be within reach, and the US would be forced into a defensive war. But what the Japanese didn't know was that the Americans were ready for them. US codebreakers had cracked Japan's secret communication codes, learning the exact time and location of the attack. With this knowledge, Admiral Chester Nimitz devised a bold plan: set a trap and strike first. On June 4, 1942, as Japanese aircraft launched their first attack on Midway, US forces were already in position. While Japanese bombers were busy targeting the island, American dive bombers and torpedo squadrons launched a surprise assault on the Japanese fleet. At first, it didn't go well for the Americans. The first waves of torpedo bombers were wiped out, failing to land a single hit. But then, a stroke of luck. Just as Japanese planes were refueling and rearming on their carriers, American dive bombers arrived at the perfect moment. Within minutes, 3 Japanese aircraft carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were in flames. Hours later, a 4th, Haryu, was destroyed. The once dominant Japanese Navy had lost 4 aircraft carriers, the backbone of its fleet. For Japan, Midway was a disaster. Over 3,000 Japanese sailors and pilots were lost, and their ability to wage offensive war in the Pacific was crippled. From that moment on, Japan was on the defensive, while the US took control of the war's momentum. Midway wasn't just a battle. It was the turning point of the Pacific War. Without it, Japan might have pushed further across the Pacific, threatening Hawaii and even the US West Coast. But thanks to intelligence, strategy, and precise timing, the US scored one of the most decisive naval victories in history. The Pacific War would rage on for 3 more years, but after Midway, Japan's defeat was only a matter of time. These battles weren't just fights, they were turning points, moments where courage, strategy, and sheer willpower changed history forever. Whether it was Spartan warriors holding the line, soldiers battling through the ruins of Stalingrad, or pilots turning the tide in the Pacific. Each of these victories defied expectations and shaped the world we live in today. But history is full of incredible battles. Which one do you think was the most unbelievable? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories of war, strategy and epic moments from history, make sure to like, subscribe and stay tuned for the next part.